Hey everyone, today I want to talk about this book. It's recently released. It's called Money Master the Game, seven, the 7 Simple Steps to Financial Freedom. It's by Tony Robbins. Everyone knows him. He's a best-selling author, motivational speaker. He has sold millions of books, changed millions of lives. Apparently does all this nonprofit stuff and feeds millions of people every year who are homeless and can't get food. And he's worth about 450 million according to the internet. Anyhow, this is a book about a man who used his connections to get the best financial advice for the average person who doesn't know anything about investing or saving money. And he uses his connections to talk and get the advice of the experts, the people who manage billions of dollars, and he gets the strategies for achieving the maximum return using basically what these experts tell him. Now, I would have to say that first off, it's a decent book. So if you're not an expert and you don't even know 401k apart from anything else and you're just a mess with finance, this is a good book to read. It's fairly thick, which is why I recommend just leafing through it, which is what I do. I sort of skip to the parts that I like and slowly just work at finishing the book. But for an average person who doesn't know anything about it, this is probably a great book to go to because it just tells you everything you need to know, and then it goes into detail. And it does it with the style of Tony Robbins, and it adds a new spin on it. I just very much like the whole spin to it because, I mean, you get those stale, boring books on the topic as well by no one you've ever heard of, and that can get very boring. This one, he's very passionate about what he has to say, and the way he says it, oftentimes it just makes it pop. Having said that, though, it's not a perfect book. I'm not gonna lie. Some of the stuff in here, I mean, if you are anyone like me who's not a complete novice, and I've done some research online and read a few books on the topic, a lot of it's just like, I've heard it before. Stuff like expenses can eat up all your, like a huge portion of your savings. That's not something the average person knows, though. So if you're the average person, you can be like, what's going on? And what I'm talking about is that if you choose to put money away to save for retirement 30, 40, 50 years down the line, and you see the expense fee and you remark 2%. What's 2% going to do? 2% compounded every year exponentially will eat up like 40, 50, 60% of your potential savings. And that's what the mutual funds and hedge funds don't tell you. On the flip side, though, there's other stuff as well, like the fact that, I mean, if you're a complete novice, you might be surprised to even realize, as I've mentioned in other videos, that compounding in itself is magical in that exponential, you can compound out and it will grow exponentially, and 5-10% annual return on average can grow into tremendous amounts of money given a large enough time frame. The kickback to it is it's like very tough to get average returns, and then there's all sorts of potential pitfalls and things that I know about that this book doesn't get into. So I feel like getting into this field in itself is kind of like a landmine, because the more I learn about it, the more it's like I am so scared for the average person, because if they just get into it, they can end up getting very greedy and very illogical. And it's there's so many pitfalls for the average person to get very greedy and then just not do so well. But I feel like this is a decent book in understanding the basics, and then just if you have a level head and you don't aim for the fences, you don't let the greed consume you or tempt you, and you aim for a reasonable return. I think the biggest thing is that people, once they realize, oh my goodness, if I can compound this out at this rate for that many years, I'll be a millionaire many times over. I'll be rich. And then like there's so many things. Like the more I learn about it, it's not that easy. And there's so many things you have to learn. Like the fact that you will have to be very patient because it will take decades to do. And then there's stuff like the fact that it goes up and down. So there are years that you may be down 20-30%. Now, having said that, Tony Robbins, he in this book, and I do think this is the true, like, if there's any golden nugget from this book, this is probably the true thing. It's this weather fund. It's called a weather fund because he found this strategy that basically back tested 80, 90 years. You know, it only drops like 4 or 5 times in those years, and of those times you lose money in those years. It's like 1 or 2% or 0%. So it's back tested to be like almost, you know, impossible to topple, and the whole purpose of it is to be it's designed to level and go through any potential economic climate, any downturn and depression, recession, whatever, with all possible scenarios. The 4 big scenarios being unexpected inflation, unexpected deflation, unexpected economic growth, and unexpected economic decline. And basically it's this very simple composite of bonds and stocks and so forth. And I think it's decent. It's pretty decent. But it should be noted that a lot of these things that he's coming up with, he's asking experts, and these experts, you know, basically he keeps pushing for this thing like, oh, just tell me a simplified version for the average investor. And then like the you know, these are people, billionaires running billions of dollars, and they understand and they know it's very complicated. And so the thing is, he keeps pushing for something that's you know, he's asking for like a simple magic golden pill and truth. But as you all might know, that in reality, simple magic pills don't really come about. It doesn't really come about in fitness or health or anything for the matter, because if it was that simple, everyone would be fit with 6-pack abs and so forth. And so many people want to believe that, so they convince themselves of it, and all these companies who want to make billions or millions want to do that. So what I'm basically saying is that I can't help but feel a little bit skeptical of the whole thing, because one thing you learn is that if you back test data and you data mine data, sure, it may work perfectly in the past, but in the future it may not work. And then there's all sorts of other things like, well, did you factor in all the things that have to be factored in? Which, I mean, he even mentions in the start of this book that you have to factor these things in, such as the fact that what a return has been historically is not the actual return for that year, because of instances like you forgot to factor in all the transactional costs, the taxes, the expenses, and then when you subtract that all out, it's like, what, 2%, 1% this year, 0%? I lost money? What is going on? So you have to factor that in, and then it's like, I mean, let's just assume that he has factored all this in, and it works in the future. I think generally it's a fairly decent thing, but the whole thing about it is that he got this from, I believe it was Ray Dalio, who's a billionaire, manages billions of dollars, and I mean he did this whole story for explaining how he achieved this, and got this strategy and this portfolio, this asset allocation thing. And I mean, I read it in this book, and I also watched a few interviews of his on YouTube, and it's basically like he's pulling it out of him. He's like, please, just give me a simplified strategic model for the average layman. And then the billionaire Ray Dalio was like, oh, you know, it's not that simple. You can't really do it. And then he keeps doing this, and you know, I can't help but think like, well, it's not that simple. I don't believe it is that simple. Like, maybe the basic tenets can be that simple, but oftentimes it's like, you know, if it were that simple, then why do like a majority, like 70-80% of mutual funds underperform the market index every year when they are academic geniuses with all these numbers and stuff? So it's kind of like you can't just pull out this simple formula. And I do think that he ends up falling into the same lines that a lot of books in the past have been falling into, which is just that, like, oh, I have this magic formula or this magic newsletter that's producing these massive returns. And most of those, when you break it down, it's like, well, on paper it does that well, but many of them have actually been incorporated into reality, and they don't do as well. So I mean, I could go on and on about that. I don't really want to disparage him, because honestly, like, I'm still very interested in this book, just to see if there's anything in here that maybe I'm missing. And I guess, yeah, check it out for yourself. One thing I was very interested in when picking this up, and if you haven't picked this up, there's no excuses. I got this at the library. I had to wait like a few months because there's about 70 people ahead of me on the on hold list, but it was worth it. And I'm very surprised how new this book still looks after 70-80 people have checked it out. But it's almost brand new, by the way. And I guess I don't want to completely disparage the book, because again, I respect Tony Robbins. But one thing I was very much interested in was all the people he had interviewed, because Tony Robbins, this is a man who literally has many connections. And so he set out to interview, and he did. He interviewed numerous billionaires who managed a lot of money, and a lot of them had different investment styles, and I'm familiar with a few of them, not personally, but I know their investment styles, and some styles I know very well. And so I was very excited. And some of these interviews, unfortunately, like, again, utmost respect to Tony Robbins, but some of them were like 3, 4, 5, 10 pages long, which was a little underwhelming. And oftentimes they didn't even really talk about like much about asset allocation. And so I was a little bit disappointed, but regardless, you still have that sort of bit in the back, which I think I'm still excited about, because I haven't gotten through all of them, and there may be more valuable information. Who knows? So you got that in the back, which I don't think anyone's ever really been able to set forth and do like Tony Robbins has in this book. And I guess the biggest thing, though, is I do sense a lot of just him trying to get the best message out to the average layman. Like, from what I can tell in this book, this man, and from what I've watched from the hour-long interviews I've seen of him promoting this book and talking about it, he's definitely, like, there's no deception behind it. If there is any deception, he's being fooled as well. Like, it's not because he's trying to trick you guys. He's really speaking from the heart, just trying to speak the truth. you know, I went into this book with a little bit of skepticism because a lot of books have a lot of fluff in them to fill up the pages so the publishers can publish them. And honestly, like, although there is a bit of fluff, I don't think it's intentional fluff. I really do think that for Tony Robbins, he really wants to bring it out. And I mean, uh, it's not that thick a book, so if you really want to check it out, really just go ahead and do it. I'm a slow reader, and it really isn't pulling me in. I'm not that interested in this book, but I've heard stories of people who have went through the whole thing in a night. So, I mean, check it out yourself if you're interested. Maybe you're one of those people. And I guess the last thing to say is just some of these stories are very interesting. And I guess the biggest thing is that, like, sometimes you can kind of tell that, like, again, back to my main point, that it's not that simple. And for me, I've pulled out some interesting things from it because of my slightly deeper knowledge in investing that are just quite insightful. So already, I think I've gotten some value out of this book. But I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest warning is that the things in the back really, it's really interesting because he says, like, for instance, they talk about Paul Tudor Jones, who is a very successful trader, and I watched his documentary, and it's a very interesting thing what he does. He does. One could argue it's almost not investing. He's trading. It's a different style, and he talks about trends and stuff like that. And it's like that's a completely different ball game that gets fairly complex. Not to the point of rocket science, but it's like that's an occupation on its own. So I could feel like the average layman may get the wrong idea from just what's mentioned in the book about his advice on trend setting and trend following and what to do and what not to do. But ultimately, I do think if taken in the right way and just understanding that these concepts are used so you follow the right path and avoid the psychological biases that will urge you to come in when at the wrong time and drop out at the wrong time, which pretty much means following the crowds into hysteria and then illogical fear. If you can follow those guidelines, I think it'll be a decent ride. Hopefully I haven't confused you more than you have been helped by this. But yeah, check out this book. See you guys later.